Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Room Schoolhouse. Today we are highlighting one of the wealthiest men in American history, one of the wealthiest black men specifically at that time in that era. His name was Stephen Smith. And if you back up to the era of the anti-slavery movement in America, especially the northern states, at the end of the revolution, really during the revolution, you see every single northern state begin passing anti-slavery laws. In 1780, Pennsylvania passed an anti-slavery law. And specifically, this law was known as a grandfather law or a grandfather clause, that any black babies born in Pennsylvania, they would be born free. But there was a compromise in this law that said if someone was already a slave, they didn't have to be free to that moment, but if they had kids, their kids would be free. Stephen Smith was born when this law was in effect. He's born in 1795. And this law in Pennsylvania allowed him to be born free even though his mom was in slavery. And so it really is this kind of weird dichotomy that you are, like for the mother, you're in slavery, but you have a child who's free. Navigating that seems really weird, but this is where he had the opportunity to grow up in freedom. But when we talk about somebody growing up with a bad circumstance, right? When you have a major uphill battle, this is certainly someone who was disadvantaged early on, although he had his freedom, really rough situation. And to go from where he started to become one of the wealthiest black entrepreneurs in American history is quite the story.
Right, and it's really a rags to riches story, and he uses the free enterprise system to really just give him a leg up. And so, like you mentioned, he was born free, so he had every opportunity available to him. So when you start off that poor and you want to make your next big step, there's a lot of thought that goes into it. So does he want to sail the seas like Paul Coffey, or does he want to be a minister like Lemuel Haynes? That would take years of studying Greek and Latin and theology. Or what he actually did was a third option of an apprenticeship. And I'm a huge fan of apprenticeships. I believe that the world would be great if everybody found one person whose life that they admire and shadow them and learn everything they can from them. And that is exactly what he did.
Yeah, and specifically too, when we're talking about apprenticeship, we're talking about a skill or a trade. Right. And so something of value you have to contribute. But let's also back up, because I can already hear some people. I hear your thoughts through the camera right now. Wow. As we are recording. It's an impressive skill I have. But I can hear, right, as people are maybe questioning, like, wait a second, if his mom's in slavery, right, he's born free, then does he really have the same opportunities everybody else does? But the reality is in Pennsylvania was one of those northern states who the majority of people in Pennsylvania were embracing the anti-slavery, the equality position. The reason the law came out the way it was is there was a compromise, because there were people who said, look, we've got all these slaves and we don't want to lose the value we have in them. And so the compromise was, okay, then we will allow you to keep the slaves you have, but you can have no more slaves that we're not gonna do anymore. And sometimes people can look at these compromises and they can say, well, right, the fact that you didn't get it all, that's evil. It's probably a little bit of in my mind, a little bit of an inconsistent and maybe not strategic thought, because even if we look at like the abortion issue, if there was a state that said, hey, we're going to ban abortion after 20 weeks, and someone says, you shouldn't do that law, ban all abortion. I agree, we should ban all abortion, but maybe let's take the first step in this. And looking at that era in Pennsylvania, certainly the law of 1780 was a first step in the anti-slavery direction. But as he's growing up, certainly there would have been racist people, because people can be racist no matter where you are or what the laws of the state are. But the majority of the sentiment in Pennsylvania at that time was much more in favor of equality, was much more in the anti-slavery position. So even though he's growing up in a weird era, it doesn't mean that he wouldn't have opportunities.
Right, and it's really pertinent to mention that this was one of the first regions in the world that started abolishing slavery and began the process of doing so. I mean, this was decades before Great Britain had even launched any of their efforts. So looking in the context and the span of history and during that time, They were on the forefront of freeing blacks and allowing them to use their God-given talents and abilities to be able to do what this man did.
So let's go back. So Danielle, you were talking about apprenticeship, which we are huge fans of. We often at Wall Builders on radio and various venues, we talk about the failure of what is the modern education of modern academia, whether it be university or so often some of these public school institutions. And one of the things we know there is a deficiency of in America is even people who have practical skills and abilities. Whether you're fixing refrigerators or air conditioning units, or you are a welder? Just be a welder. Don't be a welder. I don't even know what that means. Moby Dick, here we come. I don't even know what that means, right? But whether we're looking at something across the span of the industry, we know that there are millions of job opportunities available. And right now, so many people that go to university, they come out with this woke ideology, rejecting basic common sense, practical values. And so looking back at what was much more the common routine of early America, it seems like something to be practically back. So he decided he's going to be an apprentice, and he found a business where the gentleman who owned the business said, "Oh, I'll take you in." But the way apprentices worked, maybe not a whole lot different than some of how it works today. Right. We'll bring you on, but recognizing you don't have the skill and ability yet, so we're not going to pay you like you're really talented. We're going to bring you in for a very small amount of money, but we're going to teach you a skill that once you learn the skill, you then can go make a lot of money because you now have a skill that is pretty valuable.
Which is significantly more than universities pay, I just want to say. So, and yes, until they learn the skill. So Stephen specifically, he showed a quick aptitude to this. He learned it very quickly, and he actually became a manager. So the thing is, once you learn the skill well enough, then you graduate, so to speak. But if you end the indentured early, you have to pay off the rest of the loan. So because he was so good at what he did and had a mastery of the skill so early, he was able to pay that off. And he actually started his own business. And so he started his business and he employed both blacks and whites. So then he moved to Philadelphia, opened his own lumber yard, and I mean, his story just takes off from there.
Absolutely. So he opened his own lumber yard. He also opened up his own coal plant and started real estate investments. And in everything that he did, he was successful at it. And you could see him grabbing principles learned in the rough work of running a lumber yard as a child and using those same principles to be successful in literally every endeavor he chose as an adult. What I love about his story in particular is that as he got older, he decided to grab a lot of that wealth and did so much good, specifically funded numerous operations for the Underground Railroad.
And also one of the things that motivated him in a lot of this, we've talked on so many of these heroes, is their moral underpinnings, right? It was the influence of Christianity that led them to do so much what they did. Right. As you're mentioning, even the Underground Railroad, well, who were the primary leaders of the Underground Railroad? It was pastors, and it was churches. Mm-hmm. And so he, in the midst of funding the Underground Railroad, he actually was funding churches as well. Mm-hmm. Churches involved in the Underground Railroad. And so you see this connection of, especially where they were in the North, mm-hmm. is the Christian movement was the one leading the abolition movement. And so he's giving money to churches. He's involved in the Underground Railroad, mm-hmm. which is huge in this anti-slavery movement. So you're talking about someone who was born free, his mother was enslaved, he grows up, opportunity, still a challenge, finds an apprenticeship, becomes incredibly talented at this, begins opening businesses, has success, expands to new areas of different kind of business dealings. I imagine to run a coal plant, probably a little different than running a lumber yard, right? Having real estate investments in these different business ventures and then helping fund churches and the Underground Railroad. This was an incredibly influential guy that if we look back historically and we ask honest questions like who were people making some of the biggest differences in their day, mm-hmm. this guy's name has to be on the list.
Sure, absolutely.
And he never brought up equity, which I find is interesting. So he never fought for, he didn't use anything as an excuse. He used his tragic past to motivate him mm-hmm. to do better and to get ahead in the free enterprise system. And that is what's so great about capitalism, right? It allows us to achieve great things through our own expertise and our own self-discipline.
Well, and this is a great example too of why like ideas of critical theory, when the Marxist idea when it first came to be, it was rooted in economics, this monetary conspiracy theory that people with money, the only reason they have money is because they stole it from people without money. And people that didn't have money, the only reason you don't have money is because the wealthy people took it from you, because the idea was that everybody should have the same amount of money. And that idea never took root in America, because what was always known about America is regardless of where you started, you could achieve and become successful. And these are the examples that we can point to of why Americans never believed in these Marxist ideologies, because what we saw in America is if you have freedom, if you have opportunity, if you're willing to work really hard, if you'll develop a skill and ability, you can become incredibly successful. It's no different than the things we would encourage even today, that if you will take your God-given gifts, talents, and abilities, if you will work really hard, develop some skills, some talents, and then use those as hard as you can for the glory of God, God can bless a lot of the effort, the work you are doing. You can become incredibly successful. This is one of many examples we can see from history. So Stephen Smith is an example of someone who was incredibly influential in his era, who God blessed him to become incredibly successful. He used his wealth to invest in churches, to invest in the Underground Railroad, making a difference in the cultural issues of the day. And as we look back historically, when we ask who are the people most influential in their era, he definitely is one of the guys whose name has to be mentioned in his era because of the influence he had. To find out more about Stephen Smith, go to wallbuilders.com, and you can look for these American Heroes series. On the back, of course, it has footnotes. You can go to his story, look up more. We want you to know more about this guy and so many more of the American heroes. To find out more about some of these American heroes, join us next time on One Room Schoolhouse.